Some of us like to drive, some of us like to fly, some of us love taking the train. Today on the Lost in Transit podcast, I speak with a man who has seen the world from the seat of a bicycle. Nicolas Marino has put close to 50,000 miles on his bike, cycled all through Asia and all around Africa before returning to his now home, Australia, to cycle across the outback. Enough of my jibber jabber. I hope you enjoy the interview. I'd like to welcome to the podcast Nicolas Marino. What's up, Nick?
Hey, how you going, Spud?
I'm going good. So, I'd like to start at the beginning. Before you were a cyclist, you were a backpacker? Is that right?
Yeah, well, let me clarify this. I don't feel I'm a cyclist at all. I just chose a bicycle as means of transportation to travel the world, which in my mind, in essence, is totally different. Yeah, but I basically was a backpacker for about 10 years until I discovered the bicycle, and then the rest is history, I would say.
What compelled you to do the bike?
Well, by the time I met guys traveling by bicycle, I had been traveling for 10 years, as I said, and I felt I was missing some kind of intensity, like the intensity that I had felt in the first years of backpacking. And my trips were kind of extreme always, and I felt I was missing something. And when I met these guys that were traveling from Europe on the way to Asia, it just blew me away. I heard their stories and I was like, oh my God, that's what I've got to do. This is the next step. I have to do this. And it was so compelling that I said, yeah, well, this is what I've got to do. And in 1 week's time in Tehran, I was there at the time, I bought everything I needed and I converted to cycle traveler. Yeah. And
then just straight away you were a cycle traveler.
Yeah, pretty much. It was extremely hard in the beginning. Like, just to give you an idea, in the first 100 meters, that's probably about, I don't remember the conversion, but in the first block, I fell 5 times because I couldn't control the bicycle fully loaded. And the first, I would say, 2 to 3 months, the only thing I thought about all day on the road was actually how to sell everything back, because it was so miserable, the experience. It was so difficult. I knew nothing about bicycles, and I knew I wasn't fit at all. I had no idea, when you hear the stories, and the stories that I could tell you right now, it's very hard to see. It's very easy to be fascinated by them, but it's very, very hard to give you an idea of what goes on in the background. It's like really, really hard sometimes. Yeah.
Okay.
So, yeah.
Was there any decision in the bicycle that you had bought, or was it just a bike that was available?
Well, yeah, exactly. At that time, I was in Tehran and I was a backpacker, right? So I went to one of the best bicycle shops in town. I mean, Iran is pretty well stocked in all these things. There's a huge cycling community, so there is stuff available. So I went with this Dutch couple that were helping me choose what I needed, because I had no idea, right? So we went to a shop and chose the best possible bike. It was a $500 one. It was pretty good, actually. All the components were pretty decent. So as far as the bicycle was concerned, there were no problems. But the gear, like the gear that I needed the camping gear, the panniers, all of that was crap. I mean, there weren't good stuff available. So I struggled with that in the beginning, but not with the bicycle itself.
Okay. How much would you say the bike weighed at the beginning? Fully loaded,
probably,
that is.
Probably about 100 pounds, maybe. Oh. It was pretty light.
Okay. I mean, it still seems like it's a lot, but for traveling like that.
Well, maybe we are getting a bit ahead, but at the last bit of my trip here in Australia, it was about 250 pounds.
Holy cow, that's a lot.
It is a lot, yeah, because of all the water that I needed to carry.
Oh,
yeah.
Okay, across the outback?
Yeah, exactly.
Okay.
Yeah.
So from Tehran, where did you head?
I basically continued with the trip that I had in mind because I was taking a sabbatical for 1 year. And my original plan was to head to China overland and settle in Asia. So I basically continued that way, and I was going across the countries that I hadn't been before, because I had been to East Asia and I had been to Europe until Turkey. And so I basically followed the Central Asia route, which includes Turkmenistan, Uzbekistan, Kyrgyzstan, Western China, Pakistan, India, Sri Lanka, and then I flew to Thailand, and from there I made my way to Shanghai. And that was 2006. That route became very popular in the last years, but at that time there were very few people doing it.
Okay. So you were a pioneer, so to speak.
Kind of, yeah.
I like it. That's awesome. That's very awesome.
Yeah.
So then how long did you take off before your next big bike trip?
Well, I settled in China after that. And I lived around 6 years in China. And while I was living there, especially in the second part because I lived in Shanghai first, then I moved to Sydney, and then I went back to China. And when I went back, I moved to Chengdu, and Chengdu is right next to the Tibetan Plateau. So during the 4 years that I spent in Chengdu, I would cycle all over the Tibetan Plateau into the most remote regions of it. And that was kind of the master's, or even more, it was like the PhD in adventure, because, when the first trip had been tough because I wasn't prepared. But when I was living in China, I said, when I moved to Chengdu, I said to myself, okay, I don't know when I'm going to live, but I know that when I leave, it's going to be by bicycle. So I prepared, during those years, I would do a lot of extreme trips across the Tibetan Plateau, which I consider my place in the world, and other parts of China as well. So I cycled all over there. And then in 2012, I finally started so it was about I finished the first trip in 2007, and I traveled all over these regions that I told you during those years. And then in 2012, I left again for the last trip.
And that last trip was 3 years?
Was 5 years.
It was 5 years.
Yeah, continuous. So it was like 5 sabbaticals.
That is incredible.
Yeah.
And that trip took you through Asia again, through the Middle East, and around Africa?
It basically, I had never been to Africa. I had spent nine years of my life in Asia, in between traveling and living and working and all that. So Africa was like a big question mark for me. I had been all through the Americas pretty much, except for Central America. I've been all over South America. I mean, I'm from Argentina, so I know the region. I had been all over Asia. I had been to Australia. So Africa was like, oh, okay, this is where I had to go next, because I didn't know what it would be like. So yeah, I basically planned the whole trip around Africa, but I was in China. So before getting to Africa, I cycled all over the island regions of Asia. That is, Japan, which is not, Japan, Korea, Indonesia, the Philippines. I spent between those four, I spent 9 months. Then Mongolia, which was quite extraordinary. Then other parts of China. Then India, Nepal. And from India, I flew to Cairo. And then from Cairo, I went to Cape Town along the East Coast. And from Cape Town, I went up to Morocco and Europe along the West Coast. So yeah, so I spent I spent 2.5 years alone in Africa. That was like 30,000 miles, something like that.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's nuts.
Yeah.
So being out biking and kind of being in the elements, did you ever get sick? Did you ever pick up any strange diseases, anything like that?
I picked up a few things. I mean, you'd think that you're gonna get in like really, really serious stuff, but honestly, it wasn't that bad. I think exposed to the elements, I'd say the most the first close call that I had was a thunderstorm, an electric storm in southern Africa, in Lesotho, and that almost killed me. It was extremely dangerous, the situation I was in, and I saw my whole life passing before my eyes. It was really extreme. I even wrote in those extreme conditions. I even wrote a note for my family because I knew I was going to die. Then after that, there were several encounters with wild animals. That again, the second and third close calls. The first one was with lions. The third one was with elephants and snakes in the jungle. And then I got sick. I got sick once. I got sick. I got Shigella, which is like a very rough type of dysentery. That was in Ethiopia, but that was relatively easy to cure. And the second thing that I caught that was kind of serious, not life threatening, but it was really, really horrible. I got a bacterial infection on my legs that started spreading all over my body. And that was after 3 months across the equatorial rainforest in Central Africa, really extreme 3 months. And by the time I was almost out of it, I had lost, 15 pounds. I had no vitamins, I had no proteins. I was really, really malnourished. So, and in the rainforest, nothing really heals because it's always humid. I was always with mud up to my waist. Sometimes you're almost permanently filthy. So nothing heals. Whatever you've got, whatever wound you get, it will get infected, and there's no way to stop the infection. So I got this bacterial infection, and it started spreading all over my body. It turned into impetigo, which is like when you get an infection and you're like, let's say you get a wound in your ankle, then you scratch it, or even you rub it to clean it, but then you scratch your arm, and a new wound opens up in your arm, and it keeps spreading all over your body, and it's impossible to stop. So that was really nasty. I needed a 12 days antibiotic treatment, and it was really bad.
Did you?
But nothing really life threatening, but something that had to be treated because it was like serious.
With this impetigo, did you then have to stop for the 12 days while you were on the antibiotics?
No, not really, but I did stop because I was, carrying a lot of accumulated exhaustion. I was pretty much exhausted by the time I reached Lagos in Nigeria. It had been already like 5 months of extreme conditions. And yeah, I found a couch surfer from South Africa living in Lagos, and he hosted me for like 10 days in his very big house, very good conditions, air conditioned. He had a cook that cooked for me, and I was able to treat myself. And in Lagos, there were pharmacies that didn't have fake medicines, which is common all over Africa. So I got the proper treatment, and I got up in no time. I was already, I recovered pretty quickly. I'm very, very strong by this time. So
that's great. So on an average day, how far would you say that you would biked?
It's really hard to say because, in normal conditions, you go about maybe 60, 70 miles a day.
Okay.
Like that would be normal conditions, right? That would be tarmac, relatively flat, very few uphills, very few climbs. And that would be a good average. Maybe 50 miles would be a good average. However, there were times across the jungle, like in Congo, that I would go for it would take me 10 hours of pushing across the mud to pull off maybe 7-8 miles. And yeah, it would be like all day pushing for days. Sometimes I needed in northwestern Kenya, I would need 7 days to pull off 60 miles, 70 miles. Right. So that's a full week of going in extreme conditions. And that applies to pretty much every extreme that I've been to, whether it's high altitude in Tibet or, across the snow or across the desert or across the jungle. I get into really nasty situations.
It sounds like it's pretty extreme.
Yeah, sometimes it is.
Okay, so with the impetigo and the lions and the elephants, what would you say were some of the hardest moments on your travels?
You're going to laugh at this. For 2 years in this trip, I traveled with my ex-girlfriend. And I was pretty much in love with her. She was the one for me, right? She was traveling with me. We had a very nice thing going. And for me, that it's so hard to fall in love with someone. Having her was, incredible. It was like a dream come true. But she left me, and those months after she left me were like really, really. Really tough. I still have no idea how I had the strength to keep cycling, because there were times that I was going insane, and like sometimes in the middle of nowhere, and you're surrounded by natural beauty, and it's extremely it's a very incredible landscape you're going in, and then you cannot see anything because your mind is totally blocked. And those months were extremely hard, were the most challenging, because that was the first and probably the only one time where I felt I didn't want to keep going. Maybe, I don't know. I don't think I would have never stopped, but at that time I felt like there was no reason to continue, because I was totally my mind was totally blocked. So yeah, that was the hardest. That was really the hardest. The rest is fun. I mean, no matter how hard it is, it's fun.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. And you never wanted to stop after she left? No. I didn't want to stop. I kept going. I don't know where I got the strength for that. But yeah, I basically kept going, and I'm glad I did, because I would have regretted it. Right? Yeah. I mean, the trip in general sounds like it was great.
Yeah, it was a life-changing experience. Absolutely.
So for a trip like this, for bicycling, and I would assume you camped most of the time?
Yeah, I camped a lot, but hospitality is a huge thing in Asia, in Africa, and pretty much all over the world. But people invite you into their homes, and this is like very, very frequent in Africa. In Africa, every village becomes your home, and people make you feel at home. So I didn't camp as much as one would think.
Okay.
Yeah.
How did you budget for a trip this long?
This is of course the question that I get the most. Some people think you got to be a millionaire, but just to give you an idea, I spent an average of about $100 a month during at least during the whole trip in Africa. Sometimes I would spend 300. Like in Southern Africa, you've got more things, you want to eat better, and it's more developed, so you have access to things. So I would spend maybe 300 in a month. So that's about $10 a day. The rest of the way was $100. Sometimes I would go across countries in like 25, 28 days, and I would spend, like the lowest I spent was $17 in 28 days across Angola, because people were just so incredibly hospitable that they would invite you all the time. You didn't have money. You didn't have things in which to spend money.
Okay.
So I basically saved. I saved for all those years that I worked in China. I'm an architect, so I made pretty good money in China. Cost of living is very low, so I was able to save a lot. And aside from that, I started making money with photography. I'm a professional photographer, and with such a low budget, just selling a few interviews or stories or photos to magazines, I would make enough to keep going without having to use my savings. So it really, the budget really depends on your standards as well. If you're expecting a lot of comfort, of course you're not going to travel with $2 a day. But if you're humble and you're more into the experience on top of everything, for me the luxury is the traveling itself. It's being able to be on the road. So yeah, I'm pretty basic. Yeah.
That's all right.
You don't need a lot of money if you don't want to.
Yeah, I've done some budget traveling. I've never had a bike, but I've definitely gotten by on $5-10 a day.
Exactly. Yeah.
It's very possible.
Yeah.
And
absolutely.
I mean, cycling has to be one of the greatest ways, because it's basically free transportation.
Absolutely. Yeah. And sleeping. I mean, you either camp or people invite you into the home. So you never, I don't know. I've probably paid for accommodation like 10 times in 5 years. It's like
10 times.
Yeah, wow. Maximum. Yeah.
That is,
and I think that's a lot.
it's way less than I would have expected. That's for sure.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
No, for me it's way more. I should have paid like 3 times in my mind.
Okay. Yeah. So on the topic of budgets and staying, where was some of your favorite places to camp?
Well, that's an easy one. Like Mongolia is like it's like a dream come true. Mongolia is like the biggest campsite in the world. It's the whole country is a campsite, and it's a dream. Mongolia is one of them. Tibet is another one. Even here in Australia, it's really fantastic. As soon as you're out of the cities, it's just unbelievable. The whole country is a camping ground. Then Namibia is spectacular as well. All of the Sahara Desert is also incredible. But I'd say if I had to choose 2 really spectacular ones would be Tibet and Mongolia, and maybe Australia or Southern Africa, because these are places where you have no electricity for hundreds of miles around you, and you can see the stars as you've never seen them before. It's just really, really amazing when you're in the middle of nowhere in these places, and nights become surreal. They're otherworldly. Yeah.
Was there any specific part of Mongolia or Tibet that stand out to you, or is it just kind of in general they're incredible?
Yeah, usually it's generally like Mongolia is incredible all over. I would say that the heart of the country in the triangle region between Ulaanbaatar, Lake Hosbol and Lake Terhinsagan, all that part, which is the heart of the steppe, it's so dreamy. You cannot even believe you're there. And this is only 2 or 3 months a year, because the rest of the year is just unbearably cold. It's a land of extremes. So, but during those 2-3 months of summer, it becomes incredible. It's just simply breathtaking.
Okay. Very cool. I got to experience a little bit of Mongolia last year, and I loved it so much. Yeah, you can imagine by bicycle when you go along the steppe. I don't know how you travel, but it's one of those countries that you want to have your own means of transport, because the country itself almost has no proper roads. So you're always on tracks that were carved by the nomads along centuries. Yeah. So yeah, if you haven't been with your own transport, I would highly advise you to go back on maybe a motorcycle if you don't want to cycle, or some sort of transportation. We had there was a couple of us, and we had rented a van, and it was It was pretty incredible.
Yeah, exactly.
It was by far the best part of that trip that I'd taken, and I tell people all the time, and they're like, Mongolia? Really?
Yeah. Yeah, I think people have no idea in general what Mongolia looks like.
Yeah, I kind of agree. When you're doing this cycling travel, how much photo gear do you take?
Oh, I carry quite a lot of gear, because when I started this last trip, I have been a photographer for almost 20 years now, and for this trip, I made it. Even though traveling is a priority and still is, I wanted to professionally document all the experience, and not only the experience, but most importantly, all the people that came my way. I'm mostly a documentary photographer, so I knew that for that I needed my professional gear. So there's always a compromise, and I pretty much wanted no compromises. So I took all the professional gear. It's very heavy. It's probably about, I don't know, I think it's around 30 pounds, including all the shit that you need to be a photographer on the road, which is camera lenses, and then the laptop to edit, and the hard drives for backup, all the chargers, and all the things you need. So yeah, I carry everything. I made no compromises, and it was totally worth it, because I was able to capture the sort of images that I wanted to capture. Yeah,
that's what's important.
Yeah, absolutely.
So when you're in these remote places and you're trying to document it, how do you go about talking to locals and getting portraits, if that's something that you do? And I do mostly portraiture, documentary photography, and portraiture. Okay. And I think it all has to do on how you relate to people in the first place. This is something I give workshops, and this is something I always stress. For me, the reason why I approach people is not to get the photo as a trophy, as a reward. For me, photography, as important as it is to me, it comes second when it comes to people. I approach people because I'm genuinely interested in their lives, in who they are. I approach people to share my life with them. So photography, once you establish this connection with whoever comes your way that you find interesting, then photography comes easy. It's just a direct consequence of the connection you establish with these people. And how I communicate, well, I speak almost 7 languages myself fluently. Oh my God!
And I understand quite many others. Every word I get, the first thing, as soon as I cross the border, I start asking, how to say the basic questions in the local languages. So I write it down, and as soon as I cross the border, I start greeting people in their local language. It really opens. This is something, I always tell, I have a lot of American friends, of course, and I always tease them because they're so fucking lazy, right?
Yeah, I will 100% admit that.
Exactly. So I always tease them because, you gotta make an effort, to communicate with people in their local languages, because it makes all the difference. When people see you making the effort to communicate, they see this as a sign of empathy, and they really appreciate it, and they see the especially in places where language is known to be difficult, they will try even to help you and teach you. So I do that, and then when everything fails, when nobody speaks the languages that I speak, then, so as I said, either I ask to maybe somebody who speaks some of the languages that I speak, or sign language. You'd be really, really amazed at how far you can communicate just because you're a human being, right? It's all these gestures that we have that convey expressions and feelings that make it so easy to communicate. Most of language, most of communication is nonverbal, and you can really see that when you're traveling in places where you don't understand the language. So yeah, that's pretty much how I do it.
All right. You said you speak 7 languages fluently?
I speak 6, and I'm studying the 7th and 8th at the same time.
What languages are they?
So Spanish, mother tongue, then English, German, French, Portuguese, Chinese, and now I'm studying Tibetan, and I'm studying Italian. Yeah.
Yeah, that definitely makes me feel lazy.
Well, you got an excuse. You guys who are born native English speakers, you were already born in a very easy position.
Yeah,
doesn't excuse it, but yeah.
No, I like to refer to us as lazy tongued.
Yeah, I think so.
That's yeah. I'm amazed. I don't think I've ever met anybody who can speak 7 or 8 languages.
Yeah.
Okay, so one last thing before we come to a close here.
Yeah.
If you had any advice for anybody out there who wants to travel in general, be it, what would you tell them?
I would tell them, it wouldn't be anything practical, but I would say to travel with an open heart and an open mind. I think that's, some people these days, tend to think that traveling itself will change your life, and I don't think it will. I've come to know a lot of other travelers who've been on the road for decades, and it feels as though they haven't learned anything. So I think the attitude with which you set off to travel is essential for the trip and for the traveling experience to become really relevant in your life. So staying open, being like a sponge, meaning absorb everything. Don't try to impose your views on others. This is again, it's not for the sake of criticism, but as I said, I have a lot of American friends, and I always talk about these things openly. Mm-hmm. Some people tend to believe that they have the universal truth, and this is very common in what I've seen in many Americans. Not all of them, of course, but in societies that are very developed, they tend to believe that they know better than others. So this is very, very bad for traveling. I think we should always stay open. I've been in many situations where I don't necessarily agree with the people I'm interacting with, but there's always something to learn. And for me, humility is extremely important. So I don't try to impose. I can share my way of seeing things and I can debate about it, but I won't try to convince anyone that what I know and the way I live is the best one. So yeah, stay open, be a sponge, be ready to absorb and be open to be changed by the experience, to be changed by what people could teach you. That would be my best advice. The rest is easy, it's just flow. Yeah.
Very awesome. Very cool. So if you could tell us where everybody can follow along with your adventures and.
Yeah. So I have my own website. In there you have access to all my photography, my traveling stories, and all the social media links. The website is www.nicolasmarino, and Nicolas without the H. So it's the Spanish version of the name, nicolasmarino.com. And then there's the Instagram. I post frequently on Instagram on Marino Nicolas, at Marino Nicolas, and then Facebook, Nicolas Marino Photographer. If you go to my website, all the links are there. Or if you search me on Google, the first 3 pages are about myself. So.
Excellent. And then one more question. Do you have any upcoming travel plans?
Not for now, but I mean, I'm always concocting adventures in my mind. But for now, I'm settled. It's been 5 years, so I've had enough for the time being. So I'm taking it easy, living a more stable life, and then I have a lot of dreams, a lot of extreme dreams. So I'll probably be on the road eventually. So sooner or later, I'm definitely going into different adventures. One that it's been crossing my mind, it would be to cross Africa from west to east, but using a canoe along its greatest rivers.
Oh, wow.
A dugout canoe. So that would be one of the things that it's in my mind already. Okay. Whether I'm going to do it or not, I don't know. But I never knew that I was going to do the things that I've done. So it's everything is possible.
Yeah. That would be very, very interesting to watch.
Yeah,
to follow along with.
Absolutely.
Excellent. Well, again, I'd like to thank you, Nico, for doing this.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much for your interest. And for me, it's always great to share, these things with people, because I believe that we can live differently. We don't have to be in the hamster's wheel as we are taught since we are born. So, it's always a pleasure to show that, anyone can do these things as long as you want to do it, to do them.
Very cool. Yeah. Very cool. Awesome. Well, thank you, man.
Thank you, man. It's been a pleasure to talk to you.
You can read these stories and you can hear them come out of someone's mouth, but you can never really wrap your head around it. I'm still astonished by the things that Nico has done, and I'll never really have a grasp on any of it, really. I love that he's sort of conjuring up a dugout canoe trip across Africa. That would be so incredible to see unfold. Remember to follow Nico on Instagram. His Instagram is Marino Nicolas. It's Nicolas. Check out his website, nicolasmarino.com. There's tons of good stories on there to read. Incredible photos. I have nothing but amazing things to say about all of it. I will say that when I started this podcast, or started thinking about this podcast, Nico was definitely the first person that came to my mind that I wanted to interview. So doing this was a huge thing for me. I hope you enjoyed it as much as I enjoyed talking to him. And that concludes another episode of the Lost in Transit podcast. Be sure to check us out on social media, Instagram, Twitter, Facebook, all Lost in Transit PC. Shoot us an email if you have any questions, comments, concerns. have any ideas for guests who could be on the show, the email is lostintransitpc@gmail.com. And until next time, folks, get lost.